I'm Randall Bass. I'm the Vice Provost for Education at Georgetown University, and I've been the host of the Reinvent the University for the Whole Person series. I think we started the series because we felt that the national conversation about higher education was just going in the wrong direction. Everybody in higher education is talking about some piece of this problem. What was missing was not just the focus on the whole person, but a focus on the whole person in the context of this rapidly changing, emerging digital environment. When we're talking about the whole person, we're just talking about a kind of education that sets you up in a way that isn't just about your first job. It's about your entire life, an entire life of personal fulfillment. You have to function in a way that allows you to thrive in your environment, to make really smart decisions, to not be manipulated by your environment, to be able to create collaborations, to be able to create networks. What I think has been the distinctive contribution of this series is that we brought the values of whole person education, the sensitivity to this very current emergent environment together in a systems approach to thinking about the entire shape of higher education.
We used to know what to teach kids in universities to go then get the jobs that the society would afford. We don't know what the kids today need to know in 5 years to know what we should teach them.
I think we're moving into an era of great acceleration and rapid change. I think it's an era of incredible collaboration to work with others, increasingly diverse groups of people.
One of the things one would like to see develop in a person in the course of her education is a growing capacity for judgment, both in practical or technical matters and in larger questions of values, of political judgment and the like.
Well, there are some things about higher education that don't change. One of them is that its enduring mission in a democracy is to allow people to live fully in their time, and that's a very broad mission. What has changed while that mission endures is the economic value of higher education. We know that higher education has increasing economic value. We also know that the non-economic value is very high. In fact, anybody who tries to estimate non-economic value always comes up with numbers that show that the non-economic value is higher than the economic value even now.
When you're talking about disruption, disrupting the university, then you're really focused on how is it that we can stay what it is we are despite what's happening around us. When you're talking about design, you're talking about what it is that we want to become. The people we brought together around the table, they were really focused on what kind of university do we want to make at this moment in history.
If we were to start from scratch today and say we want to create a university, we wouldn't create what we have. But we've made this massive investment in systems and semesters and degrees and buildings, and which of those things were useful and are working, and which of them are just sort of habitual things that we do.
Until fairly recently, universities had a monopoly on learning complex subjects.
In Connected Learning, we really talk about the new technologies as an opportunity to realize the historical aims of progressive education in new ways.
And thinking about what is really working with students that at our institution, where we serve overwhelmingly low-income, first-generation minority students, and at institutions like that, what seems to make an enormous amount of difference is actually thinking about how you put things together. Not so much take it apart and fragment it, but how can we connect all sorts of different kinds of services, whether it's the classroom, the student support, the peer mentors, the job experiences, the undergraduate research, and think about the connection between them.
We need to provide diverse pathways and diversify delivery modes to meet the various students that we have. We also need to integrate more immersive, meaningful, relevant, authentic experiences into students' education. They need to see a clear value proposition.
Higher education is uniquely poised to address the most fundamental and pressing questions that we face, in the sense of there are no other organizations or structures on the horizon that could do so.
I think simply put, there's two major risks of staying the status quo. One is that universities will become increasingly irrelevant, and two, that the inequalities in educational access that currently mark our society will just get wider.
Quite frankly, we're losing a lot of people in higher education because we just haven't modernized.
These technologies are going to become a core part of the teaching and learning process. And a core tenet of any business is you don't outsource your core business process.
How do we address the historical inequities that have put us into this situation where we have issues where some students are getting that development of the whole person and others are not?
We know that everybody is tending to go into college at higher rates, but of course the more privileged kids are going at even higher rates, so the equity gap is continuing to rise, and it's becoming, if anything, more of an arms race rather than an equalizing function.
One of these dichotomies that's been part of the national conversation has been the opposition between face-to-face and online learning. In all kinds of ways, that's just not the case. How much is the learning environment shaped to empowering students?
I feel that we're a bit like Houdini in that we've put on a straitjacket, but unlike Houdini, we find it very difficult to get out of that straitjacket. It's the 15-week semester, it's the 3-hour course, and these place all kinds of constraints on our thinking.
We have this love affair in our colleges with this concept called seat time. And I think we have to, the impediment is really to move away from that model.
In my 16, 17 years of covering higher education, I've kind of heard this over and over again that we have one of the most diverse systems in the world. But as you travel to them, most institutions still deliver education in very similar ways. We really don't have a diversity of delivery methods to what Phil said is an increasingly diverse needs of students.
Students ought to be learning how to learn without having an institutional structure to guide them.
Because I think a fundamental skill that we should be working on with our students, we should be working on in our institutions, is coming to be able to act within uncertainty. It seems like the future is going to be full of opportunities where we don't know everything we need to know.
The big power of these environments is not just using them to push information out, but to push information out to the interface. And learning about the learner in the moment allows us to understand better how learning happens, so that we can use that to design much more effective learning environments for a much greater diverse and larger audience.
The whole idea that the internet out there is starting to find its way back into our physical space and constitutively reimagining everything and everyone in some real way. How we can start using these virtual spaces to deeply reimagine or reinforce or even just redesign the physical spaces in which we inhabit on campus. I'm still an optimist. I believe the two are completely dependent upon each other in some really powerful ways. And I would hate to see in the wake of MOOC mania, people kind of discount the fact that that movement was still, like the internet, a product of the university.
If we value this full range of outcomes that we think mark the whole person, then we have to be able to measure and assess that full range. What we're seeing is this massive shift from what we might call inputs to outputs. We've been focused on how many credits have you taken, how many courses have you taken, have you passed those courses. Now the revolution is in focusing on what is it that you know, what is it you can do, and how is it that we can assess and demonstrate that you know it.
One of my customers from Stanford University, he said to me, we know a lot more about our students when they come into the university than when they graduate.
If we want to move from how much money do you make when you graduate to are you armed with all of the values and attitudes and resiliency that we want you to have to build a better society, then we need to start measuring stuff that's hard to measure.
A definition of quality is complex because people are complex. And I would hate to see a simple answer to the question of defining quality at a national or state level. I'd like to see rating systems and the like take a longer view. People that are climbing out of poverty, are they getting into the middle class?
I constantly come back to the question, do we really mean what we say when we say we value learning? when we think about assessment, we really do have to think very hard about what it is that we believe counts as evidence of sustained and worthy intellectual engagement.
Grades are a mess. They don't tell you anything about how much you learned. So I actually would advocate as a design principle that we get rid of grades because that'll force us to come up with some better measures.
Move towards portfolios, the move towards digital badges have a lot of potential, and I think the technology in particular is causing very rapid changes in the way that evidence and information circulates in social networks that's allowing some and forcing others in short order to transcend traditional notions of measurement and assessment.
The credential of the future is actually your work product. We need to have a living place to show this body of work that continues to evolve and grow throughout our careers.
Another critical feature of our structures that has to change is the faculty role. To faculty who fear that their role is going to be diminished by this emerging environment, I think we showed that their role as mentors, as inquirers, as leaders is more important than ever.
That the internet is better at professing than we are. If what professing means is, I have information you don't have, sometimes I think if we called ourselves cognitive coaches, we'd have a better sense of the balance of what we were trying to do in teaching people how to think, teaching people how to learn.
We need to expand the cast of characters who's interacting with students to go beyond faculty and advisors to include peer mentors and coaches and others.
How do we help people move from thinking about my course to our curriculum? I don't think we'll ever do a good job in using the technology if we don't figure out that first move, endorsing the value of collaboration for the sake of student learning.
Our only chance at significantly improving higher education is to transform our universities into environments where very systematic, collaborative experimentation can take place, where practices that are developed at one institution can be shared and adopted and adapted to another institution, that the data that comes out of students passing through universities and on into their lives can be made use of, where teams of faculty and staff and students across boundaries come together to create the best version of a particular learning environment for a particular subject.
I've spent a lot of time restructuring organizations, and something that I've noticed is that an existing status quo institution or organization cannot reinvent itself. You have to start from a greenfield environment and reinvent for the future. Otherwise, you take too much of the baggage from the past into it.
I don't know why universities can't create new organizations within themselves that leverage the history and expertise and brand name and financial and intellectual resources, but are autonomous. We do need sort of a startup culture for education organizations.
Designing these environments takes a diversity of expertise that we can't expect an individual faculty member to have. And that's why I believe that this enterprise of designing these environments still belongs within the traditional research university.
I hope I don't step on anybody's toes in saying this. I see a lot of the most promising examples taking place at institutions that are serving the most vulnerable students, because we have to come up with innovations.
Ask the students where they're going, what they want to do with their lives, and ask that question in front of faculty members, and everything begins to change.
Not only do we have this special opportunity to view the future in the way you've just characterized and to work towards achieving it, but I think we have both an educational and perhaps one would claim a moral responsibility for doing so. Otherwise, I think we fail to meet the special character of what has driven us to be involved in education.
What I hope the series has contributed is both a language and a set of strategies that allow all the stakeholders and change makers inside universities to come together in a very productive way to talk about what these changes could look like. They say that in the 19th century, the railroads that thought they were in the railroad business went out of business. But the railroads that understood that they were in the transportation business survived. I think what's really salient about this moment for higher education is that we have to ask ourselves, what business are we actually in? There's an urgency now to fulfill a kind of vision that I think a lot of us have had since the 80s, and then with the birth of the World Wide Web and the globalization of the internet and the emergence of the learning sciences. And how is it that we can shape learning environments the most powerful way to empower students for a lifetime of success?